Morning. Hello there. A little while ago I finished reading Jane Eyre. I thought I'd just say a few words about it. I just absolutely loved this book. I think I spent about 5 or 6 months reading it, so I read it very slowly, with a few little gaps of weeks sometimes, and then just a few pages a day. But I thought it was great. I had tried reading it a few times in the past, and I only ever got up to the bit early on where the young Jane Eyre is left in this red room by this horrible Mrs. Reed, and the other children that are bullying her, and she's punished even though she is the victim of the bullying of the young Master Reed and everything. I never got beyond that for some reason, but then I pushed through, and then it was wonderful. It's a bit similar to experience of reading Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. Same sort of thing. Sort of spent 5-6 months reading it really slowly and didn't want it to end. I didn't want this to end in a way, and I had seen a film of it, but I'd forgotten I'd seen it. But it's just a wonderful book, and it's mostly to do with the character of Jane Eyre herself. She's got that line in there about like, the more alone she is, the more she'll respect herself, the more she'll need to fall on her own resources to respect herself. And I read a little all the notes in the book and everything, and a little bit the background and how it was published under a different name. Originally Carabelle, as was the Anne Bronte's book and Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights. Anne Bronte's, was it The Tenant of Wildfell Hall or something? So yeah, I just thought it was a wonderful book, this. Really early on, I really didn't like Rochester. I really didn't like him. I thought, what a git. But by the end, I do feel a bit differently about him. And he does go through this sort of period of... But then there's the other big thing about it is Bertha Mason, his wife, It is his first wife because she dies. I mean, I know people will have read the book or they know the story, so I'm hopefully not going to tell you anything that you don't know anyway. Yeah, the thing about her is, why is he says, she was drinking all the time, and then like her mother before her, they went mad. There's madness in the family. But there's a bit where, in some of these notes here, where in a letter, Charlotte Bronte says, "Oh, I regret in a way just focusing on the horror of the mad person, the horror of, the fear that they can induce, and that she's almost described as animal-like, and I regret that, and I wish I would have done it slightly differently, I think, and looked at more of the pity about what's happened and perhaps why, and that's probably where Jean Rhys has come in with, obviously fascinated and loves this novel as well, begins to be fascinated by Bertha Mason, and what was she like before, what was she really like? Can we just go by we only get Rochester's view of her, and then these scenes where Bertha Mason is attacking people, biting them, and trying to set fire to someone in bed, well, Rochester, and but there's got to be more, so that's why she wrote, Why Did Sargasso See? can't remember when that was written. Was it the 70s or 80s? Maybe the 60s. I can't remember. But she was writing, I think it's 70s. I could look it up, but I don't know about you, but I just like looking everything up all the time. It's all right, but I know roughly when it was. I mean, I think Jean Rhys spent a long time writing that novel, apparently. Like 23 years from the inception of the idea until it was published. Because she was, from memory, she was like living in the West Country, Jean Rhys was, and some people in the so-called literary world or whatever thought she was no longer alive. And I think the story goes that there was a lady who was trying to produce I don't know if she was an actress or a producer, but working for the BBC radio back in the 70s, I think, 60s or 70s. And she was wanting to produce a radio version of Good Morning Midnight, which is a novel by Jean Rhys, and trying to get permission for it. So she's trying to track her down, was she alive or dead? And eventually they found her, Jean Rhys, in the West Country somewhere. I think, whether it's true or not, that's what I read. And they find her, and then eventually she's helped to come back to London in some way, and has a kind of a resurgence of her after this book, Wide Sargasso Sea, which is like a prequel to Jane Eyre. And I'd love to read that book again. I have read it, but it's a long time ago, but I hadn't read Jane Eyre at that point, so it's going to be a different experience reading it again, because it's a young Rochester going out to the West Indies and meeting a young Bertha Mason, and their journey back to England. It's the imagined pre-life of Bertha Mason and Rochester as written by Jean Rhys. So I really would like to read that again. Anyway, I had written lots of other notes I'm not going to bother with now, and just keep it all short. And people read up about this book anyway, don't they? You know, and the history and all that. Don't need to. But there's a bit in it I really loved. I mean, I loved so many parts of this book. It's the character, in the same way that it's the character of the unnamed character in Rebecca. We never find out her name. She's the second Mrs. De Winter. We never know her name, but here obviously Jane Eyre, we know her name, but it's her character and how she meets these struggles with her strength of character that I just thought, I found her heroic in a sort of very, the way she deals with things. She's like only incredibly young, she's like 19, 20, and she's just dealing with all this stuff, getting this strength from somewhere, this self-belief, this self-reliance, and this self-respect. You know, she's been treated so badly, but she another character that really got on my nerves was this guy, St. John, or St. John, I think that's how you pronounce it, St. John Rivers, trying to convince her to be his wife and go over to, he doesn't love her really, to go over and be this missionary in India. But he's just going on and on and on like a dripping tap about it. Like telling her what she's got to do with her life. Thank God she gets away from him. I knew she did, because I knew vaguely that she goes back to Rochester eventually, after she finds Thornfield all burnt down. And old Rochester's blind, but he gets some of his sight back a little bit. And he's sort of chastened, and he's a different kind of guy. He lost, she says something to him at the end, you were all about, it was you giving all the time, it was you, what you could do for me all the time, and that's that balance has been changed. She's literally helping him around. Certainly initially when he can't see, she's a helper and a prop to him as well, and it sort of balances them out more. And he's lost some of his, I don't know if it's pride, he's lost some of his arrogance. He's different, he's changed. It's changed him. But obviously in the novel, Bertha Mason is aka the mad woman in the attic, is a thing you think about, which is obviously what Jane Eyre did as well, which prompted her to want to flesh out that story and understand that character. Troubled by it, I suppose. Troubled by the fact that there's this woman taken from another country, ends up in an attic in this big hall being looked after and just kept up there and hidden as a secret. But anyway, what was I going to say? Yeah, no, it's apparently most of the reviews at the time were very favourable, and it was a kind of an instant, really popular book. But there were some that were critical of the book, the novel, saying it was sort of anti-Christian and anti against the kind of the natural order, the class order of things, because it's at the same time as this is written, there's all the Chartist movements going on, revolutions in different European countries, and the Chartists are trying to get more, the votes for men at the time, I suppose it would have been, but for more working people, whatever, working class, whatever, however you want to describe it, they want to get more rights for ordinary people. And so somebody, there was a review in something called the Christian Remembrancer, which really didn't like it, sees it as a threat to, who's this young girl saying she's as good as Rochester, as good as somebody in the aristocracy. No, she doesn't say she's as good. She says, I'm better than you. That's what Jane is. She's like, no, I'm better than you. She's great. She's an amazing character. It's one of my favourite characters in a novel I've ever read. I just thought she was just incredible and heroic, and someone you want to emulate in a lot of circumstances where you're put under pressure, or you feel people are trying to make you feel less than you are, or trying to control you, or trying to make you dependent on them. Or she does everything right. Jane Eyre. Everything. And you get into her internal world, her struggle. I just thank God she got away from that St. John guy. I mean, he was alright, and in a way, he turned out to be, he's just like, I don't know. It's weird how he ends the book. His letter kind of ends the book. And obviously, he's not long for this world in his letter. Anyway, I'll just read this little bit. There's lots of bits I could read, but this is one bit where she's leaving. She's been told to go by the Reeds, to this school, Lowood. So she's leaving Gateshead, where she's grown up, where she's been treated terribly by these children and her aunt, who's horrible to her. Oh, really awful. I'll just read this little bit. And it's about the journey really early in the morning to this school that she's going to, run by this ghastly headmaster guy who's stinting on the food and everything. Anyway, I remember but little of the journey. I only know that the days seemed to me of a preternatural length, and that we appeared to travel over hundreds of miles of road. We passed through several towns, and in one, a very large one, the coach stopped. The horses were taken out, and the passengers alighted to dine. I was carried into an inn. where the guard wanted me to have some dinner, but as I had no appetite, he left me in an immense room with a fireplace at each end, and a chandelier pendant from the ceiling, and a little red gallery high up against the wall filled with musical instruments. Here I walked about for a long time, feeling very strange and mortally apprehensive of someone coming in and kidnapping me. For I believed in kidnappers, their exploits having frequently figured in Bessie's Fireside Chronicles. Bessie was like one of the servants at Gateshead, who was sort of, now and again, kind-ish to Jane, having frequently figured in Bessie's Fireside Chronicles. At last the guard returned. Once more I was stowed away in the coach. My protector mounted his own seat, sounded his hollow horn, and away we rattled over the stony street of L says in the notes it could be Leeds. I think it might be Leeds. The afternoon came on wet and somewhat misty. As it waned into dusk, I began to feel that we were getting very far indeed from Gateshead. We ceased to pass through towns. The country changed. Great grey hills heaved up around the horizon. As twilight deepened, we descended a valley dark with wood, and long after night had overclouded the prospect, I heard a wild wind rushing among trees. Lulled by the sound, I at last dropped asleep. I had not long slumbered when the sudden cessation of motion woke me. The coach door was open, and a person like a servant was standing at it. I saw her face and dress by the light of the lamps. "Is there a little girl called Jane Eyre here?" she asked. I answered yes, and was then lifted out. My trunk was handed down, and the coach instantly drove away. I was stiff with long sitting and bewildered with the noise and motion of the coach. Gathering my faculties, I looked about me. Rain, wind, and darkness filled the air. Nevertheless, I dimly discerned a wall before me and a door open in it. Through this door I passed with my new guide. She shut and locked it behind her. There was now visible a house or houses, for the building spread far with many windows and lights burning in some. We went up a broad pebbly path, splashing wet, and were admitted at a door. Then the servant led me through a passage into a room with a fire, where she left me alone. And then she's arrived at the school, where she's has a difficult beginning, and one of her friends there dies, and she's with her when she dies. I think she's with her when she dies. Yeah, I think it's really quite a touching scene. And then she becomes a teacher there, and then, answers the advert for the job at Thornfield, and the rest is history. So yeah, that's. I'm definitely going to read Wide Sargasso Sea by Jane Eyre, which I love Jane Eyre's writing. I've read pretty much everything by her, all her short stories and her novels set in the 1920s. There's 3 or 4 of them, mostly in Paris. Mostly set in Paris, where Jane Eyre spent, sort of the years in the mid-1920s. There's a line in Wide Sargasso Sea where Bertha Mason, because obviously we're hearing from her directly, her inner life and what she feels about things and what her predicament and why she's in this other country, etc., and her past and what she thinks of Rochester and what she thinks of what's happening to her. I think from memory there's a line she's on top of Thornfield by the battlements, and there's a line that I love where she goes, I should look it up, but it's like pretty much, I saw the sky, it was red, and all my life was in it. I saw the sky, it was red, and all my life was in it. And that's Bertha Mason, who in Jane Eyre we just see as someone who's in a psychotic state or highly aggressive state. So yeah, definitely read that book again. Anyway, this has got longer. It's gone longer than I thought. I'm trying to think if there's anything else to say. There's so much I could say about it, but I mean, it's such a well-known book. But so glad I read it. It's one of my. I thought it was beautiful. I think they all gave themselves these kind of potentially androgynous or non-gender specific names because they thought that women writers wouldn't be taken so seriously or something like that at the time. Although Jane Austen's already been on the scene and other ones as well. Elizabeth Gaskell, I don't know. Yeah, I think that's it. 1847. Incredible. Yeah, I love it so much. So anyway, if there is anyone who hasn't read it, and you might have seen the film version, I want to read, I don't know what, I've started Wuthering Heights a number of times, but never get far, but I want to read that at some point. My friend and I, dearest friend and I, watched Wuthering Heights over Christmas, the Laurence Olivier Merleau-Brion one, and it was really good. But I would like to read the book, the whole of the book, and it would be a different experience, I'm sure. There's so much missed out in films, isn't there? Necessarily so, but apparently there's some adaptations of Jane Eyre where they even miss out the whole thing where she's gone to stay with finds these cousins after she's homeless for a few nights. I think that's right. I don't know how you could miss that bit out, but it's I suppose that's, people adapt things in different ways. Yeah, and Anne Bronte, The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. I think she might have wrote another one as well, but I think that's her first one that came out a couple of months. Wuthering Heights and Tenant of Wildfell Hall came out a couple of months, like in December of 1847, and I think Jane Eyre came out in September, and it was quite a sensation straight away. And the publishers of the two latter books, which was a different publisher to the one that published Jane Eyre, so the publisher of Anne Bronte's and Emily Bronte's, but they went under the names Acton Bell and Ellis Bell. Yeah, Ellis, Acton and Currer. The publisher was pretending that it was all one person doing them all, but eventually I think the message got out, and eventually they gave up those original names. And it was originally, in the first edition of Jane Eyre, it was like, it's an autobiography. It's an autobiography, like a literary autobiography, but then that was dropped for later editions, and it's acknowledged as a fiction, as a definite fiction rather than a fictionalized autobiography, Although it seems, from the notes that she's, as many novelists do, they draw from their own lives in different ways, and a little bit from the school that she and some of her sisters went to, Charlotte Bronte, the school for the daughters of clergymen. So the Lowood in the school, there's some of that in her experience of her schooling and Jane Eyre's experience there. Yeah, I think I'll leave it there. God, it's gone on a bit there, but it's just, there's a lot of references to the Bible in it when you look at the notes at the back. Pilgrim's Progress, Shakespeare, Keats, Shelley, Byron. Not keen on Byron, but anyway, that's another story. Yeah, loads of stuff from the Bible, really, references, and Walter Scott, I think, novels of that, and sort of references to, there was this magazine, Edinburgh Blackwoods magazine, where there's these Gothic tales in there that the Bronte family, the children must have read when they were, young teenagers and stuff. They started reading this magazine that was obviously a popular magazine, Blackwoods it was called, and they had these Gothic tales were the flavour of the time. They were big, and so yeah. Can't think of anything else to say. I'm really glad I read it. There was something else I was going to say, though. It's gone. It doesn't matter, does it? Beautiful book, beautiful character. There was something else I was going to say. She was... Oh, just come to me. I'm glad I've stuck with it. I saw a film last year in the cinema. I think it actually came out last year, called Emily. And the focus of that is Emily Bronte of Wuthering Heights fame. I think that was the only novel she wrote. But she wrote a lot of poems. And Charlotte Bronte wrote poems as well. I think Anne did as well. They got together, I think they kind of privately published their own collected poems, I think, before the novels. Anyway, this film, Emily, is really good. And obviously Charlotte Bronte's in it, Anne Bronte's in it, and Branwell, the young man. It's good. I don't know how realistic it is, but they're taking opium or they're getting high up on the moors, and he's drinking as well, Branwell, but it's focusing on Emily, and there's some really spooky bits in the film where they have a sort of a séance too, and their mum comes and visits them in this séance, or takes over Emily. I think it's Emily that sort of like takes her over. The mum's come back because the mum dies when the children are young. So much, but it's a really good film. I really thought it was great. Very gothic-y and atmospheric and haunting, really. There's the guy in it, I can't remember his name, the actor, but playing the father, who's the guy in Line of Duty, who plays Ted in Line of Duty, and he's playing the father, the perpetual curate of Haworth, which is somewhere I'd love to go. I've seen all the pictures of the town or village. I'd love to go there. It looks amazing, and I'd love to go. And I saw this short clip of I think it was Muriel Spark, a writer, in the graveyard of that parsonage, Haworth parsonage, and she was talking about Emily Bronte, I think it was, and just saying that well, she grew up in the parsonage, and from her childhood window in her bedroom, the view was of the graveyard, and beyond that, these empty moors, and so you could see where their imaginations were kind of lit up by the atmosphere and the kind of bleakness of the area. But yeah, good film, that. And anyway, that's it. That's the video. Take care, and I hope if you do read it, if you haven't read it, I hope you love it, and as much as I did, or in your own way, obviously. But I just thought it's an absolutely incredible novel. It just blew me away, and I didn't want it to end. That's the last thing. The father, he outlives them all. He outlives all the children. Two die very young. Is it Elizabeth and I can't remember the other one. Sorry, there's another young girl, and then all the other ones, including Charlotte, who lives the longest to 36 years old. And then the father lives out all the children. So that's 5. No, 6 children. 6 children, because two die young. Then you've got Bramwell, he dies young. Anne and Emily and Charlotte. Charlotte lives the longest till about, she's 36 or something. It must be just incredible to be the father and see all 6 of your children die before you. And obviously his wife dies as well. Anyway, there's a bit of a sad note to end on, but there we are. A lot of death and but what that family, that some kind of genius, the word, bandied about, but there's something that's entered into the spirit of that family, that the young people, particularly Anne, Emily and Charlotte, that they're just sort of amazing. And they used to make up stories when they were really young, and had, with Branwell as well, and had these sort of fictional worlds, these epics that they were writing. Glass World, I think, was one of them, and Angria or something, and this other sort of fictional, weird, epic world that they wrote in these little notebooks. It makes you think, and none of them went to university, none of them did any courses or anything, and I think they were homeschooled, because the father took them out once the 2 youngest children died. And I think Charlotte Bronte thought that school that is fictionalised, it is believed, as Lowood, the conditions in that school was responsible for those younger children dying. And the father takes the other children out and has them privately tutored at home. Doesn't do them any harm, does it? It seems like, you find that with quite a lot of writers, that obviously not everybody could afford to do it, but being tutored at home and having the time and space to your imagination to grow and flow, and just not be hammered down by. But then she carries on sort of learning and goes to Belgium I think she goes with Emily, does she? I think. Wanted to learn sort of languages, and I think she's a governess for a very short while, so she knows that governess world and sees how they're sort of looked down upon and seen as kind of invisible and not really seen as human beings. She says they're not treated like people in these grand houses. But thank God she could go back to her home at the parsonage and focus on their writing and produce these amazing. I think Tenant of Wildfell Hall, I'll give that a go next, I think, Bronte-wise, Can see how people get into the whole world of them, as with Jane Austen's sort of world, and you can see how people get captivated. I follow some people on Twitter that, there's one guy that does all these pictures of the area, Bronte landscapes, and other people, it's just a whole world unto itself that seems, it's both gone, but it's still here in some way. The potentials for that kind of imagination and that sense of the world being haunted. There's some spooky bits in the book. They're not like in your face sort of horror, but there's spookiness. There's a spookiness all through it, and a kind of supernatural element. Anyway, that's it. Cheers. Bye-bye. Take care. Bye.